What if France won the Napoleonic Wars? In our own timeline, France, which was led by Napoleon Bonaparte, fought Europe from 1792 to 1815. Napoleon did control almost all of mainland Europe, but this ended after the invasion of Russia in 1812, which ended in a disaster, and later him being exiled to Elba, and later St. Helena. But what if that didn't happen? What if France won the Napoleonic Wars? In this timeline, Napoleon successfully defeats Russia and forces them to sign the Treaty of Riga. Poland gets back eastern Lithuania, which Russia took in 1795. Napoleon also puppets the Hetmanate of Ukraine led by Lucien Bonaparte, Kingdom of White Russ led by Louis Bonaparte, and Grand Duchy of Livonia led by Pauline Bonaparte. Sweden also got back Finland, and the Ottoman Empire and Persia were given back their lands Russia took from them despite of them being neutral. They then joined the Napoleonic Alliance. In 1814, the United Kingdom and France make a peace agreement in which the United Kingdom would stop supporting the Spanish rebels and France would recognize the independence of Portugal. They also agree to end the continental system, and that the United Kingdom would get all French colonies in the Caribbean and Senegal. Spanish America rebels against the Spanish government in exile, but like in our own timeline, but with heavy support from the British, the Spanish government wins, but grants its colonies full stateship. The Dutch government in exile in modern-day Indonesia, Sri Lanka, South Africa, and Guyanas also has to grant its subjects more autonomy. In 1820, Elisa Bonaparte dies and her brother Napoleon inherits Lucca, which connects his Italian holdings in Tuscany and Rome with mainland France. The next year Napoleon himself dies, and Napoleon II became Emperor of the French. But since he was 10, a regency led by his mother Marie-Louise of Habsburg is in charge until he is 18 in 1829. But Napoleon II caught pneumonia and dies in 1832. He had no son, and so his brother Charles Leon becomes emperor as Charles X. Greece would still rise up against the Ottomans with British and Russian support, but France helped the Ottomans, who then win. And later France even helped them to defeat Muhammad Ali of Egypt. Egypt did become an Ottoman vassal state, but failed to take Syria. France now has a high influence over the Ottoman Empire, and French troops are stationed in the Balkans, Levant, and North Africa, and France forces the Sultan to liberalize, which resulted in a new constitution. A legislative body, the General Assembly, is formed, and the Grand Vizier is an elected position. However, the Ottoman Sultan does hold almost all of the executive power, and he is also the religious head of Islam. France also forced Persia to liberalize, culminating in the formation of the National Assembly and the Prime Minister. But on the other hand, France does help both aging empires to modernize so that they could stand up against Russia. They would later also build the Suez Canal, but it is under full French control despite of being Ottoman land. The United Kingdom spend the Pax Gallica expanding its empire. They moved their North American colonies east, conquered India, puppeted Afghanistan, and conquered Oceania. The King China would still fall into the century of humiliation with European powers taking concessions, but with smaller involvement from France. Charles X had no heir, and when he died in 1881, the grandson of Jerome Bonaparte, Victor, is crowned Napoleon III. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution breaks out, and the United Kingdom supports the king while France supports the Republicans. This would escalate into a conflict between the British and French. When the Slavs in the Balkan rose up, Russia used it as an excuse to declare war on the Napoleonic Alliance. Since France is far away from China while Russia and the United Kingdom share a border with China, the Republicans are crushed, and Sun Yat-sen flees to France. In Europe, France conquered Portugal and Gibraltar, cutting the British off of the Mediterranean Sea. They then successfully land on Sardinia, Sicily, Malta, and the Ionian Islands. Russia managed to push the French all the way to the Daugava and Dnieper River. Sweden, Prussia, and Austria even switched sides. But Prussia was quickly defeated by the Polish and German forces, and France supported separatists in Austria while the Ottomans and Germans finish off the rest. Sweden then switched sides. But because of this chaos, Russia conquered White Rus, Ukraine, Crimea, and eastern Poland. But the Russians were stretched too far and were defeated by the French near Lublin. France would then push the Russians back, and Japan even joined the war and invaded Manchuria. Like 100 years ago, the French flag flies over Moscow, and Tsar Nicholas II was forced to make peace. And after the French managed to land in the British Isles, the war ended. France annexed Slavonia, Poland annexes West Prussia and Galicia, and the Ottoman Empire annexed Transylvania. Brandenburg, Bohemia, and Hungary became French vassal states, reducing Prussia and Austria to just East Prussia and modern-day Austria. Sweden lost Scania, Bohuslän, and Jutland to Denmark, Norway. Finland became a French vassal state led by Frederick Charles of Hesse. Russia lost Rostov and Krasnodar to Ukraine. Finland got Karelia and Murmansk. Ingria became a French overseas territory led by Napoleon V himself. The other European territories of Russia become the Grand Duchy of Moscow led by Kirill Vladimirovich. Central Asia becomes an independent khanate led by Sayyid Mir Muhammad Alim Khan of Bukhara, who is a descendant of Genghis Khan himself. Japan puppets Manchuria, which contains both Inner and Outer Manchuria from Russia, which is led by the Xwangting Emperor, the Siberian Republic led by Semyonovi, the Bogdi Khanate of Mongolia led by the Bogdi Khan. Tibet becomes an independent theocracy, and the rest of China becomes a republic led by Sun Yat-sen. India, Southeast Asia, Cape, Sri Lanka, Mexico, Colombia, Rio de la Plata, Peru, and the Philippines become independent, while France takes Sardinia, Senegal, Gambia, and the Caribbean, and Spain re-annexes Gibraltar and Portugal. The Ottoman take the Ionian Islands, and Naples takes Sicily and Malta. The UK is split between 4 French puppet states. Ireland is led by Duke Alexander of Nassau, Scotland is ruled by Frederick Augustus of Oldenburg, Wales is led by Charles III of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and England is led by the 9th Duke of Beaufort, Henry Somseret, as Henry IX. After the war, the dominance of the French alliance is absolute, as France controls all of Europe. The world descends into 3 factions, with the United States leading the New World, Japan leading most of Asia, and France leading Europe and the Middle East, with Africa being mostly neutral. Napoleon III dies in 1926, and his son Louis XVIII becomes Emperor of the French until 1997. In 1937, the Third Sino-Japanese War breaks out. It quickly evolves into a Second World War between France and Japan. Turkestan sided with its Turkic ally in Constantinople, meaning that the Entente can supply China. India declares its neutrality, as they have nothing to gain from either side. Muscovian forces push Siberia all the way to the Yenisei River. The British government in exile in Australia joins the war, and their forces captured New Guinea and fight the Japanese in Indonesia. Though India was neutral, the French managed to bribe them into joining their side for Burma, and together they overrun the Japanese in mainland Indochina. After another offensive by Muscovy, they push Siberia to the Lena River. They also take over Mongolia. At the same time, the Chinese launch a massive offensive that ends with their forces in the south being destroyed. Shanghai is besieged, and Shandong is cut off from the rest of the army, who are now in a defensive line from Hubei and Johor. Meanwhile, the combined forces of Australia and the continental system take over Indonesia. In Singapore, George V and Napoleon IV meet in person for future plans against Japan. A combined offensive is launched by Australia and Muscovy. The army in the North dealt the finishing blow to Siberia, and even captured lands from Manchuria north of the Amur River. Meanwhile, Australia captured the Philippines and the pro-Japanese government there. The Chinese forces are slowly pushing Japan and Manchuria back and besiege Beijing. The reorganized national government of the Republic of China collapses, and Japan orders to withdraw to Manchuria. Australian forces capture Formosa in a bloody campaign, and the combined forces from all combatants launch an offensive into Manchuria from all sides. Japan was forced to withdraw out of Korea. On September 2, 1941, Japan surrenders, ending the war. Muscovy annexes Siberia, Outer Manchuria, and Sakhalin. China gets back Manchuria, Taiwan, and Mongolia, and puppets Korea, Siam, and Dai Viet. The Crown gets back New Guinea, Malaya, and North Borneo, and the Dutch and Spanish government in exile are re-established in Indonesia and the Philippines. India puppets Burma and annexes Sri Lanka. The rest of Japan is split between Australia, France, India, and China. France develops its first nuke in 1945, and soon later the United States also builds one. In 1956, China invades Tibet, which causes India to declare war on them. France joins the war on the side of China while Australia and the US on the side of India. The Pacific Pact is pushed out of Japan and Malaya, and slowly the French defeat them in India. After a long and brutal campaign that spans for 3 years, the Americans and Australians retreat from Kochi. The French captured in this time the Philippines and slowly takes over Indonesia. In 1961, the war ends with India being carved up, China annexing Tibet, and Indonesia and Philippines becoming independent, but with pro-Chinese governments, and Indonesia gets New Guinea and North Borneo. Japan reunites as a Chinese vassal state, and Malaya also becomes a vassal state of China. Except for Oceania, the continental system rules over most of the Old World. A Cold War may break out with France and its allies on one side and China with its allies on the other. The French after the war would be much weaker, and its vassals, like the Confederation of the Rhine or Grand Duchy of Muscovy, could become independent. After Louis XVIII died in 1997, his son Charles becomes Emperor of the French as Charles XI. The Cold War is likely not over, as both the Republic of China in Nanking nor the French Empire in Paris probably didn't collapse. In this timeline, France is for 2 centuries the most powerful country out there instead of the United Kingdom and United States. The world is in this timeline more authoritarian, but at the same time more liberal than our own. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.